Good morning. It's 10 a.m., January 14, 2020, and time to call the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance's Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers meeting to order. I'm going to ask Miss Lisa Bohannon, if you would, to call our roll.
Dennis Bridges.
Here.
Robert Davis. Jeff Duffer.
Here.
Clark McKinney.
Here.
Charles Rahm.
Here.
Robert Shackelford.
Here.
Mr. President, all board members are here and counted for.
Thank you. Next item is Chair will entertain a motion to approve our meeting agenda for today.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rahm and a second by Mr. Duffer. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Next item is the minutes of the November meeting, and I don't believe those are ready. Is that correct, Mr. Gribble?
We'll have them for you for the next meeting, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the adoption of Robert's Rules of Order. We do this is something we do every year. The rules contained in the most recent version of Robert's Rules of Order should govern the board in all cases to which they are applicable, and which they are not inconsistent with statutes and any special rules of order the board may adopt. And Chair will entertain a motion to accept this.
Motion to adopt.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Shackelford and a second by Mr. Davis to adopt Robert's Rules of Order. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And our next item is each board member should have our conflict of interest statements. This is something we do each year also, and I think each member has those signed and ready to turn in to Ms. Bohannon. Next is our legal report, and that will be Miss Elizabeth Bendell.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
So we're going to turn to item 1 through 3, which are complaints funeral 2019-06-8321 against an embalmer. Item 2 is funeral 2019-07-0391 against a director, and item 2019-08-2171 against a director. Between August and October 2019, 3 complaints were filed against the respondent, funeral director, and embalmer alleging unprofessional conduct. These complaints were filed by the children and the grandchildren of the owner and founder of the funeral home that the respondent manages. On July 27, 2019, the complainant's family lost the owner and founder of the funeral home, and the complainants alleged the following: that an unauthorized pre-need policy was placed on the owner of the funeral home. Specifically, the respondent conspired with the daughter of the deceased to have him sign and pay for an $8,000 pre-need funeral insurance contract, which was later canceled, and those $8,000 were never refunded. A copy of the deceased's funeral bill was requested by the complainants, but that the respondent refused to give a copy to them. 3, that a respondent lied about the casket that the deceased requested and stated it was discontinued despite it still being available. 4, the respondent commingled funds for personal use. Specifically, they allege that the respondent and the daughter of the deceased manipulated the books of the funeral home for their personal use, including taking trips for weddings, hotel stays, and limousine rentals. Item 5, the respondent has engaged in fraud, embezzlement, grand larceny, extortion, and conspiracy with the intent to defraud, and additionally that the respondent has plotted and gain control of the business by filing fraudulent documents. 6, the respondent bought hearses and limousines without approval from the owner, as well as opened several bank accounts and credit cards without the owner's knowledge or permission. And 7, that the respondent blocked the one complainant's opportunity to pass the funeral director license process so that the respondent could gain control of the family's funeral home. The respondent had counsel, and they did respond to these allegations as follows: that the respondent is the manager of the funeral home, where he has served as the manager since its inception in 1978, working alongside the owner and its founder until he passed away in July 2019. That prior to the owner of the funeral home's passing, he requested that the respondent write a pre-need insurance plan for his final expenses, and selected his granddaughter to be the owner of this pre-need insurance policy. The total cost was $7,961, and it was paid for by a cashier's check, which was issued in 2015. Upon the deceased receiving a copy of his insurance plan, his family became aware and they insisted that he terminate the policy. The complainant and another daughter of the deceased submitted requests to the insurance company asking that the policy amount be returned. In response to these requests, the pre-need was canceled in 2016, and to the respondent's understanding, the deceased's granddaughter received the refund because she was listed as the payee of the insurance company. The respondent stated that he had no part in dispensation of the policy. The respondent attorneys indicated that the deceased executed a notarized document on October 6th, 2009, outlining his wishes for his final arrangements and listed 4 people who he wished to make his funeral arrangements. The list did not include the complainants. Thus, the respondent did not provide them a copy of the statement of goods and services, as they were not the people listed as responsible for the bill. The respondent placed an order for the deceased's desired casket following his passing. The order was a Y33 Finch 32-ounce copper full casket. This particular model had to be custom made because it was not stocked regularly, and that the original burial plan was made in 2015. Therefore, the price of the casket had increased, which included charges for the custom top, a rush fee, and for the U.S. Army cat panel, and that the granddaughter had paid for all of these, and the casket was ultimately ordered. And lastly, the respondent denied any allegations of wrongdoing. So all of these complaints were sent for investigation, and in November 2019, a board field investigator interviewed and obtained documents from the various parties involved in the matter. No violations of our rules or statutes were found, and it's legal's recommendation at this time to close these complaints.
It appears to me that in the respondent's number D, that apparently there were issues with family members and so forth, that apparently the funeral home owner did not get along with some of his family.
That's correct. Ultimately, it seems like a family-on-family issue. There wasn't, we sent it for investigation. There weren't any violations found on our part, and the fraud and larceny on those allegations would be handled by a separate, division.
No criminal charges have been filed regarding any of these allegations, and no civil lawsuits entered into.
The complainants stated that they had obtained counsel. However, nothing had been, started at this point.
It's the only complaint with the department. There wasn't a burial services complaint filed.
No, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I'll make a motion that we follow recommendation from council.
We have a motion by Mr. Rom to accept council's recommendation.
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Bridges. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried.
Item number 4 is complaint 2019-07-2071, and it's against an establishment with some disciplinary history. This is a complaint alleging professional misconduct by the respondent establishment. Specifically, the complaint alleges the following: that the respondent's listed licensed individuals do not work for the respondent and have not been present at the respondent establishment, that the pre-need sales trust fund money is used to cover funeral home expenses and therefore families have not had their benefits at the time of death, that the respondent's unlicensed employees have made arrangements for families and signed the funeral director's names, that the respondent's employees have funded funerals, vaults, reception expenses, and gas expenses and had not been refunded, that the respondent has 2 unlicensed embalmers embalming bodies, that the respondent had increased the price on funeral arrangements if a consumer is using a life insurance policy so that no money is returned to the consumer, and that an employee of a sister location of the respondent establishment is informing families that he is a licensed funeral director and is handling all the funeral arrangements. The respondent responded to this complaint and indicated the following: that the respondent believes the complaint was filed by an ex-employee who is currently being prosecuted for charges related to unlawfully using a customer's credit card at another funeral establishment, that the listed licensed employees do work at the respondent establishment, that the respondent denies that there's any unlicensed activity occurring at the establishment, that no pre-need funeral trust funds have ever been used to cover funeral home expenses, that the respondent's employee is a licensed pre-need sales agent and has never signed the name of any of the funeral directors, and that there are currently 4 licensed embalmers on staff and 2 trade embalmers. Unlicensed staff do not perform embalmings, but sometimes do assist in dressing, casketing remains, and applying touch-up cosmetics, and that there is 1 apprentice funeral director and apprentice embalmer on staff who assists under the direct supervision of a licensed embalmer, and that the sister funeral home is a separate establishment and respondent is unaware of any of their employees informing families that they are licensed. This complaint was also sent for investigation. The investigator unsuccessfully attempted to reach the complainant 3 separate times via the listed email address. No phone number was provided on the complaint. The investigator then went to the address listed on the complaint, which was an extended stay hotel, but management stated that no recent guests were listed under the complainant's name. In December 2019, the investigator traveled to the respondent establishment. The investigator conducted interviews with the respondent's listed funeral directors, as well as reviewed various funeral documents. During that investigation, no violations were found. It's legal's recommendation at this time to close this complaint.
Motion to approve recommendation.
I have a motion by Mr. Rom to approve council's recommendation.
Second.
Have 2 seconds. I think the first was Mr. Davis. Any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Items number 5 and 6 go together. The first one is complaint 2019-069131. This is against an establishment. I'm going to read them separately, though. The complaint was received against the respondent establishment alleging respondent has not paid their balance owed to the complainant, which is a shipping company. The complainant alleges that they were contacted back in May regarding the shipping of human remains to Guatemala, that the complainant states that the total due was $3,169, and that the respondent was informed of this total, but that the respondent stated they had no knowledge of these shipments and that it was an independent embalmer/funeral director that requested them. The complainant indicated that the documents provided for the shipment had the respondent establishment's letterhead on them. Legal spoke with this complainant, who indicated that the respondent establishment had paid fully for the services and that they would no longer like to proceed forward with the complaint. So it's legal's recommendation to close this complaint. Would you like me to read the second one now or vote on this?
Is the respondent fully aware of the rule concerning paying their debts in a timely manner?
I did speak to them, and they said that they had settled it. And the complainant did state multiple times that her issue was with the next respondent, which will be a funeral director.
Okay. I was just wondering if I understand that the complainant looks like they've been satisfied and, don't want to proceed, but I just wondered why that we didn't do a letter of warning instead of just a closure. But anyway, that's just my thoughts. Further comments or questions for council?
How long did it take the respondent to pay the bill?
I believe it was paid back in August, according to the complainant, but I can double check that.
Motion to approve.
Have a motion to approve by Mr. Rom.
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Duffer. Is there any further questions or comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
So item number 6 is complaint 2019-07-4931 against the funeral director. And this complaint was received against the respondent, funeral director, alleging the respondent had not paid their balance owed to the shipping company. Similar to the last one, they were contacted back in May regarding the shipping of human remains, and the complainant stated that $3,169 was still due. Legal did speak to the complainant, and she stated that the respondent had not provided a response to her or contacted her regarding this matter. The respondent has not provided a response to legal either. They have been unresponsive in any contact. And the complainant also indicated that as of today, the services were not paid for by the funeral director, but only by the funeral home. So it's legal's recommendation at this time to authorize for a formal hearing and authorize settlement by consent order with $750 civil penalty, $500 for the failure to respond to the complaint, and then $250 for failure to pay for services rendered.
see where these two are tying in now, since we've got this one. Did the establishment, do they agree that this funeral director is using their letterheads falsely?
I didn't get into that, but they did state multiple times that this was an independent, not connected to the funeral home in any way.
It would be pretty concerning to me if someone was using my letterhead without my knowledge.
I agree. If you'd like me to look into that further, I'd be happy to.
He's a former employee.
I believe he's the former employee of the establishment, according to Mr. Gribble.
Any comments or questions for council?
Do we know if it was a common practice for this individual to use the letterhead on other cases or situations, or how was he just utilizing the letterhead and on this particular?
I mean, my understanding was this shipping company had a past relationship with both the funeral home and the
What you're asking is this a one-time thing, or is there been a pattern here?
Okay.
Has this happened more than just this one time?
I did speak to the complainant, and they stated that they had a history, and this was the only time that this had been
They know
an
of.
issue. Yeah, that they're aware of.
Just to be clear, in these two complaints, we are referencing two separate incidents of shipments requested.
Oh, it's the same shipment. There was a complaint filed against the establishment as well as the respondent. The complainant indicated that she was seeking payment from the funeral director. However, when that didn't happen, she contacted the establishment, who ultimately ended up paying the balance that was owed by the respondent funeral director, who has not responded neither to legal nor the complainant at this time.
I think, just my thoughts, I think it would be totally appropriate for the 500 for not responding to the board. And, in my mind, it would be appropriate for a $500 penalty, not only for paying or failure to pay for services rendered, but also the fact that it appears that they have falsified documents or used a letterhead that they shouldn't have been using, if I understand this correct.
I didn't ask if they were falsely using it. The only comment I got from the previous respondent was that it was completely independent of the funeral home, so.
I was just reading where it said that that they state that the respondent is falsifying documents with their letterhead and collecting funds. But that was the complainant that informed okay.
Correct.
Okay.
But the failure to respond is, serious in itself.
You can accept council's recommendation, or you can up the penalty or decrease it. You can do it together if you want to.
Make the motion to accept the recommendation and to up the failure to pay to $500.
We have a motion by Mr. Bridges for authorization for a hearing, and $500 for failure to respond, and $500 for failure to pay for services rendered. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Rahm. Any further questions or remarks? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.
Item number 7 is complaint 2019-06-9091 against a funeral director. This complaint was received by the Board of Funeral Directors and Embalmers alleging professional misconduct by the respondent, specifically alleging that the respondent had told 2 of the complainant's funeral home employees that he is a licensed funeral director and embalmer in Tennessee, that the respondent embalmed individuals in Tennessee without a license. Specifically, the complainant alleges that the respondent's uncle was transported to the complainant's funeral home and embalmed by the respondent, that the respondent knowingly made false statements on certificates of death. Specifically, the complainant alleges that the respondent forged the name of an embalmer on the death certificate of the respondent's uncle, that on April 13th, 2017, the respondent instructed an unlicensed employee to meet with a family regarding funeral arrangements, that during the period of April 4th, 2017 and April 13th, 2017, the respondent removed casket placards from the caskets and hid them in the storage area, and that around May 30th, 2017, the respondent confronted an employee of the complainant's funeral establishment and made numerous demands in a threatening and loud tone. And the complainant alleges that the police arrived and removed the respondent from the funeral home property and banned him from returning. The respondent responded to these allegations and stated the following: that the respondent had never told anyone that he is licensed embalmer in Tennessee, that the respondent has not embalmed any individuals in Tennessee without a license, that the respondent has never made false statements on a death certificate, that the respondent has never instructed an unlicensed person to meet with a family. The respondent states that he had never removed placards from the caskets and that placards have always been located in a pile on the complainant, This, due to the allegations and the seriousness of this complaint, this was sent for investigation. In November 2019, a board field investigator conducted interviews and obtained relevant documents from all the parties involved, and no violations were found. So it's legal's recommendation to close this complaint.
History, do you have the date on that it was penalty?
2011.
2011.
So when the investigation took place, the employee was no longer a part of this firm, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Part of the investigation, were any affidavits obtained?
They were, yes. Any employee currently for the complainant establishment that alleged any of this conduct was interviewed. All the various documents were collected. And the respondent himself was also provided an affidavit.
Is the respondent still in funeral service?
Yes, in Kentucky.
Was he working at this particular firm when he signed the medical examiner's signature?
No, from 2011. No.
I don't know about other members of the board, but I have a hard time taking the respondent seriously after he had already been found falsifying documents through signing for a physician.
Totally agree.
Understanding that the time of the disciplinary action from 2011, he was the manager of the establishment and the owner was not licensed, so the action was taken against him since he was in charge.
Okay, so the discipline that was taken was for him or for the firm that he was representing as manager?
For the firm.
Okay.
My understanding, my memory and recollection, of course, that's been 8 years ago. I do remember he was the manager of this establishment. The owner of the establishment was not licensed. And I don't know that the proof was ever that he personally forged the medical examiner's name, but he was the manager of the establishment. And at that time, the board determined that action should be taken against him for being the charge and responsible for the establishment. My memory is there was no doubt but what there was a forgery of the medical examiner's signature. It's one of those deals where medical examiner gave him the death certificate when they picked up the decedent at the medical examiner's office. Funeral home messed up in typing the death certificate. Instead of going back to the medical examiner's office and getting another one signed, somebody held it up to the wall and traced it, as I remember it, or looked at it and tried to mimic it. And so he was the manager of that establishment at the time. I don't recall, and I've looked at some information, I don't recall that there was ever any proof that substantiated that he personally did it himself. He may have. I'm not saying he didn't.
Sure.
I'm not saying he didn't, but
Right.
the action was taken against him, as I recall, because he was the manager of the establishment at the time.
Did the two employees of the complainant addressed in item 1 submit affidavits as a part of the investigation?
They did, yes.
And they maintained their position that the respondent did tell them that he was a licensed funeral director and embalmer?
One of the affidavits stated that they believed they couldn't recall a specific instance of him stating this, and the other one, I believe, did maintain their position.
Able to ascertain whether or not an unlicensed employee did meet with the family referenced in item 4?
The funeral documents were provided. There's no proof that legal could use to, if this were to go forward.
It comes down to a complainant said this and respondent said that, and
It's a he said,
there's
she
no,
said, yes, correct.
no proof either way.
Investigator could not find any violations, correct?
Correct, yes.
Was the embalmer referenced in item 3 contacted about whether or not he physically signed the death certificate mentioned?
There was documentation provided, like pictures as well as other things, that there's proof that this individual was embalmed in Kentucky and not in Tennessee. I don't believe that individual was contacted, only because it's harder when they're out of state to get in contact with them. But if it goes to follow up, we can do so.
Electronically.
Mr. Shackford,
Right.
let me point out, though, the complaint was just filed in the last year. The actions, you're correct. It does go back to then. But just so everybody understands, the complaint was just filed, I think it was in August or September. I don't remember exactly. But it's not been the complaint's not been filed that long. Yes,
occurrence
sir.
to file
Yeah.
a complaint.
And the allegations do go back to when you said, I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that we've not been sitting on a complaint for 2 years.
Any further comments or questions for council? I think the investigator probably did as thorough of a job as could be done.
The only opening that I see for further investigation might be found in item 3 regarding the accusation of a forged signature of an embalmer. Seems there might be an opportunity to do further investigation there to determine the validity of that charge by interviewing the embalmer whose signature was on the death certificate.
I'd like for them to investigate that and just bring this complaint back at the next meeting.
Palmer's name on my thinking is character in the be some funeral establishment records that would indicate who did the embalming, even if it's not on the death certificate. I'm probably wrong, but for some reason I think it's not there, but I'm probably wrong.
I do not know, and I don't feel strongly about it, if that's the only area of contention, but
If I could just clarify a little more. I think what I gathered from the complaint was the biggest issue was whether or not this person was even embalmed in Tennessee by the respondent versus whether he was embalmed in Kentucky. That seemed to be the stress of the, complaint was that he was embalming individuals in Tennessee unlicensed. And there was documentation provided that he was embalmed in Kentucky, and oops, it doesn't help, but.
Well, if that was the main contention, then should not the investigator been able to tell through their findings and so forth exactly what took place?
So the documentation provides for that this individual was embalmed in Kentucky and not in Tennessee, as the complaint alleges. There's photographs as well as, other documents that were provided.
I will withdraw that request and make a motion that we accept council's recommendation to close.
We have a motion by Mr. Shackelford to accept council's recommendation.
Second.
We have second by Mr. Bridges. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving on to item number 8 is complaint 2019-07-5321 against an establishment with some disciplinary history. This is a consumer complaint alleging unprofessional conduct by the respondent. The consumer gave the following timeline: that the consumer was informed that the price for a burial would be $600 and then later was told the price would be $1,600. That due to this $1,000 price increase for the burial services, the consumer could not afford the burial and was informed that the deceased had to be cremated. That a guest book for friends and family to sign was purchased but was not present at the services. That flowers that were purchased for the services were not present and were thrown out. That the deceased services were held on June 15th, but the consumer did not receive the ashes until July 8th. That the consumer's husband's ashes were in a box that was placed inside an Office Depot bag. That the deceased was placed in a rented casket that was falling apart. And that the consumer ordered a flag due to her husband's military services, but was later told that she would have to pick it up from the post office. And lastly, that the consumer requested for her husband's hair not to be cut, but when she went to view the body, his hair was cut. The respondent responded to the complaint and indicated the following: that on June 6, 2019, the respondent received a call from the consumer regarding handling the funeral services of her husband. That the respondent was informed that the price for a funeral with a burial with a silver casket would be $1,611. That the consumer informed the respondent that the deceased was a veteran and that the respondent contacted the VA cemetery but was told that the deceased did not qualify for this. And that the respondent informed the consumer of her option to have her husband buried at another cemetery for the total cost of $2,857. And that the consumer stated that the price was too much and inquired about cremation prices, where she was told that the cremation would be $1,995 plus tax, but the respondent ultimately gave it to the consumer for $1,682. That the consumer was informed that the rental casket would be used since the deceased would be cremated, and that the casket would be a copper tone color, and that the consumer approved the cutting of the deceased's hair. That a guest book was placed on the table going into the chapel, but none of the guests wanted to sign it, and that the consumer was informed of the cremation process. The medical examiner's office approved the death certificate on June 25th, 2019, and the deceased was cremated on June 26th, 2019. And the consumer did not inform the family of the deceased that the burial plans had changed, and the respondent had to explain all of the changes to the family. Based on these allegations and response, it's legal's recommendation to close this complaint.
members of the board, I find several things interesting in regards to this complaint. One, the guest book for family and friends to sign that was purchased, and the fact that nobody had signed the book. I've been doing this a long time, and that's never happened for me. Secondly, flowers were purchased, but weren't present. How did they know they were thrown out? If they assuming the casket that was used was designated as a rental casket, which typically are hardwoods, well, this one is a copper tone. And the fact that the cremains were put in an Office Depot bag, that's certainly very.
It was in the box inside a bag, if that clarifies anything.
Ms. Bendel, I'm assuming we can assume that an investigator looked into this and there were no violations found, or?
Send this one for investigation based on, the response from the respondent and the back and forth between the two. If you'd like me to send this one out, I'd be happy to do so.
So at this point, it's a he said, she said.
Correct.
Fellow members of the board, I'm just not comfortable with closure on this particular case. I would like to see some further investigation to just see what is found with that. And I'll make that in form of a motion.
We have a motion by Mr. Rom to send this case over to be investigated a little more thoroughly. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Mr. Shackelford. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Moving on to item number 9 is 2019-084141 against an establishment with some disciplinary history from 2014. This is a consumer complaint alleging professional misconduct by the respondent establishment. Specifically, the complaint alleges that 1, a pre-need contract paid for an upgraded casket, but the consumer was later told that the casket upgrades would not be provided, and the consumer had to choose from what was on the floor. That a memorial package was presented at no cost, but it was later itemized for $235. That 3, it was requested that the deceased was shaven and hair trimmed. However, upon viewing, neither were done, and the family was told it was not an option. That 4, the programs for the visitation were printed with a different photo than the one that was provided. That 5, the complainant was informed that they would be charged for a vault even if they purchased one not from the respondent. That 6, as of the date of the complaint, the respondent had not received the death certificate approximately 30 days after the date of death. And that 7, the manager of the respondent establishment failed to answer or return the consumer's phone calls to discuss the services that were provided. The respondent responded to the complaint and indicated the following: that the consumer was shown a picture of the upgraded casket, but that the consumer did not like the casket, and therefore the consumer was informed that they could choose from a range of caskets from the floor, and that the consumer chose a more expensive casket than the upgraded one that was originally purchased, and they were ultimately given that casket at no additional charge. That 2, the respondent apologized for not shaving the deceased before the private viewing, but that the deceased was shaven before the public viewing. That the respondent was not told which photo to use for the program, but that ultimately the photo that was chosen was put into the program. That the memorial package was given to the family at no cost as a pre-need discount. That the vault in question was purchased in 1976, and to remove the cost would have had to mean the entire contract would have had to be rewritten. That the respondent admits that the death certificate was provided late. However, the respondent alleges that the Nashville Department of Health was not returning calls or answering their calls. And lastly, the respondent did reach out to the consumer to discuss this matter. It's legal's recommendation to authorize for a formal hearing and to authorize settlement by consent order with $500 civil penalty for failure to process and file the death certificate in a timely manner.
You feel confident that it was the funeral home's fault that the death certificate wasn't filed?
The
Or-
timing, I mean, it was over 30 days. I can't imagine that the health department.
It was the funeral
wasn't
home's fault,
responding.
not a doctor's.
What?
It was the funeral home delay, not a doctor
Yeah,
delay.
the
or-
respondent admitted that it
Okay.
was them not getting a hold of anyone.
To your knowledge, did the complainant give any reason as to why they did not wish to use the vault that was included in the prearrangement purchased in 1976?
Based on the complainant, my understanding was that they just wanted to find a cheaper option and deduct. But no other reason was provided.
The respondent, in Item number E says that the vault in question was purchased in '76 and to remove the cost would have meant the entire contract would have been rewritten. What contractor were they referring to?
There was a pre-need.
The pre-need itself?
I believe.
Or
that's-
was it the at-need contract they're referring to?
I'm gonna have to look that up for you, sorry. They're referring to the pre. That was included in that contract, and they're stating that if they're gonna have to remove it, then they're gonna have to update it to reflect.
That don't even make sense.
Lateral agreement, the family can make changes to the agreement at the time of death if they choose to do so.
Correct. So the family did use the vault that was on the pre-need, is that the conclusion?
They did use the.
So with everything that has been presented, the only thing that the board is looking at through your recommendation is not filing the death certificate in a proper time frame. All this other is not really in question as far as your recommendation.
Correct. But I am, happy to take recommendation for upping the civil penalty for this particular respondent.
So when did the person die? When did the decedent die? What was the date of death?
I believe June.
June the
June the 21st, 2019.
21st. We know when the death certificate was filed.
Yes, we do. I believe it was, I want to say August. Till July 23rd. So a month, 30 days after.
We know when the doctor signed the death certificate.
Looking at is when did they transfer it to? It was signed July 21st, 2019. So date of death June 21st, signed July 21st.
Filed with
July 22nd.
They did not respond to when they sent the.
They did not. They just stated in their response that they. I can read you exactly what they said. That the funeral home apologizes for the delay. So.
Don't know when the funeral home actually entered the information in Verizon. Those of you who deal with the Nashville Department of Health, what is your process in ordering certified copies of death certificates through the department?
Obtain them when they're filed, the date we take it down there, or when they're officially filed with the department.
You hand deliver it?
No.
The order. You hand deliver the order, or do you mail the order? Or
No, we'll hand deliver the
you
order.
hand deliver the order and you wait and obtain the copies. They produce the copies for you when
most
you take
cases,
the order.
yes.
Okay. Okay. How it is in our health department in McNairy County, but of course we're much smaller than Nashville and Davidson County, and I wondered if your procedures were similar to what ours would be.
Following day.
Following day.
Here's it was all done through Verizon, through the electronic process.
Did it indicate why there was a delay?
They stated in their response that the health department was not answering or returning calls.
That was the part that did not make sense to me, is why they were calling the health department about the
It got to do with that
death
piece.
certificate order.
And even though they refer to the Nashville Department of Health, I think they're talking about the state health department or vital records at the Department of Health, because the death occurred in Shelby County, and so there would be no correlation for calling the Nashville Department of Metropolitan Nashville Department of Health for a death that occurred in Shelby County, I wouldn't think.
Answers just don't add up. The respondents' answers don't add up. I feel like maybe we should consider a larger civil penalty.
I feel like we as professionals need to be more on top of things with that deceased. If the family requests shave and haircut, then it should be done. And he responded that it was not an option. However, when the family came for viewing and brought it to his attention, then it was done, and he apologized for it.
Correct.
To me, that's not too professional. And, you know, the little things is what counts, like making sure the correct picture's on the program. I feel like that's our responsibility.
Well, Mr. Davis, I totally agree. It appears that this funeral director took this family for granted and didn't follow through with what should have been done when it should have been done, and along with those things as well as the death certificate, I have no problem changing the civil penalty to $1,500 in regards to this. In fact, I'll make that a motion that we approve the recommendation of a formal hearing and increase the civil penalty to $1,500.
And at $1,500, do you want to add that part of that is not only for the delay of the death certificate, but unprofessional conduct?
Yes.
We have a motion by Mr. Rom. Do we have a second?
Second.
I had multiple seconds. The loudest one was Mr. Shackelford, second by Mr. Shackelford. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
Item number 10, the final item, is complaint 2019-08-4511 against a funeral establishment. And this is a consumer complaint alleging that the respondent manipulated charges to receive payment for services that were not rendered. The consumer alleges that in March 2019, a pre-planned funeral was purchased, and the consumer states that the payments were made and that they later learned the charges were inaccurate. Consumer additionally states that on the day of the preparation, the funeral home was closed, but that the board was not notified, and consumer states that the viewing room was filled with trash. The respondent responded to the response and indicated that the consumer never contacted the respondent regarding the amount in question prior to the business closing, and that the respondent states that the consumer did not pay for the full amount for the services rendered. It should be noted that this establishment closed in June of 2019. So it's legal's recommendation to close this complaint at this time.
Quick question. When the death occurred, did the funeral home that was closed take possession of the family member?
Repeat your question.
Did the funeral home that was supposedly closed, that the prearrangement was with, did they take possession of the body?
My understanding is that the services were before the establishment closed. So this happened prior to the closing of the establishment, and then the establishment closed, and then this complaint was filed.
Preparation of the funeral closed. So they had possession of the remains.
They were open at that time.
Closed while they had the.
How many days they had? And was the closure voluntary?
Yes, I believe so.
When did the person die?
In March of 2019.
In March?
I'd also like to point out that there currently is a probate court matter from the closed funeral home against the estate of the deceased because they were not paid for services.
States that the individual, the consumer alleges that a pre-planned funeral was purchased, but down in the latter part it says that the consumer did not pay the full amount for services rendered. So
So the issue here is the complainant is stating that they overpaid for services, that the amounts were, they, paid over a 2-year period, while the respondent is stating that they were never fully paid for the services that were rendered.
Was there an investigation?
There's not, the funeral home is closed at this time, and they did provide documents of the matter that's in probate court.
Does the respondent still have a valid funeral director's license?
It's against the establishment.
Okay.
various documents, provide all the receipts and all the checks in terms of the legal fault at that time. There was no need to investigate further since all the documentation was provided.
And can we even do a penalty against a establishment that no longer has a license?
Person who owned the establishment, I may have missed some of your discussion, but the person that owned this establishment is not a licensed funeral director and holds no other license that I'm aware of with either the funeral board or burial services. No active license.
So basically, closure is our only option.
Correct.
You can say that.
Make a motion to accept recommendation.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Rom and a second by Mr. Duffer to accept council's recommendation of closure. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Bendell. The next item on our agenda is the director's report. Mr. Robert Gribble.
Board members, the first thing we have is a legislative update for today. Our office has received information from the Tennessee Funeral Directors Association that they've intend to introduce a bill regarding the regulation of alkaline hydrolysis. However, as of Friday, we had not received the actual bill for review or analysis. And our office has not received any notification from the Tennessee State Funeral Director and Mortician Association of any legislation that they intend to pursue during the upcoming legislative session. And as always, we extend an open invitation to both associations and the other interested parties to meet with staff and legal prior to introduction or discussion of legislation affecting the board.
Gribble, not to interrupt you, but Mr. Batson is here with TFDA. Does he have any updates when that might be gotten to your office?
Yes, it'll be.
Yeah, approach the bench, please.
I'm Bob Batson, Executive Director with Tennessee Funeral Directors Association.
Report of licenses administratively approved by the Executive Director pursuant to the Board Authority for the period of November 9, 2019 through January 13, 2020 are listed for you there, the establishments and the individuals. I have no establishments that have reported closing since the last board meeting. A disciplinary action report for this meeting today is a report of consent orders that have been administratively accepted or approved by the Executive Director pursuant to Board Authority. And this is as reported on the October 2019 and November 2019 Regulatory Board's disciplinary action report. Complaint report for today, we had 9 complaints open against either a funeral director or embalmer and 25 that are open against an establishment for a total of 34 complaints. That concludes my report. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have.
Chair will entertain a motion to accept the director's report.
So moved.
I have a motion by Mr. Rom. Second by Mr. Davis. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Gribble. Next item on the agenda is approval of license applications. Think we may have some individuals today. And
Possible to take a
absolutely, yeah. We take about a 5-10 minute break. Everybody is back in place, and I get there. We have Miss Lori Watson.
Watson goes up, if you don't mind, I'd have a few things to say to the board.
Okay, all right.
In the case of Miss Lori Ardell Watson, the documented conviction is for possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance and mail fraud. From the documents received by the board, it appears that the applicant was tried federally and received a sentence of 171 months plus 4 years supervised release. This applicant completed her sentence in May 2012 and completed her supervised release in June of 2014, 2 years early. This application may be denied under the Tennessee Code annotated 62-5-317. Board, I think it's necessary for you to hear from Ms. Watson regarding the crime of a mail fraud, as I believe that this particular conviction could bear on her fitness to practice. However, Ms. Watson's crimes were committed in the 1990s, and she received her funeral director's license in Illinois in 2017 and has been practicing with no disciplinary history. I will let Ms. Watson address the board, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but if the board is leaning towards a denial, we will need to go through the Fresh Start Act factors.
Thank you. Ms. Watson, if you would, just for the record, if you want to introduce yourself and if you have any comments you would like to make to the board, you can do that.
Good morning. Watson.
And, these microphones are not too sensitive, so if you will, just speak in the microphone. Be
Okay.
sure your little red light's on there.
All right. My name is Lori Watson, and I am a licensed funeral director in Illinois. I am very passionate about the work that I do. I am currently an embalmer. I also have a removal service, and I did not know that I would embrace what I do the way I do. God has a way of putting you on a course, and you don't even realize you're being put on it. My past is my past. I'll answer any questions you on my release. The first time I was on their honor roll, and I am in the Honor Society for Mortuary. I was actually allowed by my judge to mentor women coming out of prison because of how well I had done. Part of my supervisor's release was that I should not have any communication with other felons. But when I was offered the job, I went back before my judge, and he granted me permission to do so. So I worked for an organization where I mentored women coming out of prison. I went on from that, and I had been working for a funeral home just to supplement my income. And I realized I worked well with the families, and I had a passion for that type of work. So I went back to school, and it's just been going terrific. Gainful employment from my release. Prison time. While in prison, I mentored basic investments, knitting, nutrition, and I worked in the law library. And I did I did my time. I didn't let the time do me. And as a result of that, when outstanding in the work that I do, and I look forward to working in the state of Tennessee and continue.
You live in Chicago, is that correct? Okay. And are you plan to move to Tennessee? Okay.
Okay. I wish this thing could come up a little further. Okay.
Ms. Watson, I totally agree with you. Your past is your past, and when you're able to move forward from that and turn your life into a constructive work for the Lord, I can appreciate that, and it appears that you have done just that.
Thank you.
And on moving.
Well, before I could accept the job, I first needed a Tennessee license. So upon receiving that, I'm going to give my current employer 2 weeks notice, and then I should be here shortly after that. I'm going to take the time that I have while I'm down here and look for a place.
What brings you to Tennessee? Do you have family here, or?
I do not have, okay, let me correct that. I do now have a family here. My cousins, as a matter of fact, one of them moved here to Nashville. After she retired professor, she got a home here. She originally moved back to Durant, Mississippi, and now she's here because of the grandkids.
Well, Nashville's the area you're going to focus on.
Oh, Memphis.
Memphis.
Mm-hmm. A lot of family in Mississippi, so I won't be far from home. Matter of fact, I started Head Start in Mississippi. Yeah.
Watson, you're currently employed with Leak and Sons Funeral Home,
Correct.
and you said you have a removal.
Yes, I do. Watson Funeral Services.
Watson
Funeral Services. I do removals. Are you familiar with the Gift of Hope? They if you donate, and they do the procurement, long bones, skin, and so forth. I'm one of their transporters. As well as Heights Crematory. I have a contract with them as well. Heights Crematory and the Gift of Hope and a couple of other funeral homes.
Watson, is your desire to only work in a funeral home if you are able to receive your funeral director and embalmer's license? Or are you planning to do a removal type service as well? Or
Not here, no.
Not here.
Just strictly with the funeral home.
Will you be closing that business in Illinois, or?
No, my husband will
Your
continue to
Okay.
run it, and
Okay.
I have a couple of other funeral directors that work under my umbrella.
Could you give more detail about the mail fraud conviction?
Yes. The mail fraud conviction was for mail that was mailed to a mailbox that I had at, I can't remember, like mailbox, etc. And a case had been established. Another individual that they actually were looking for, but I had the mailbox. So ultimately, my name was on that mailbox. And I got the charge. It's my other case when I was arrested for everything. I had my prosecutor to pull everything that I had into one jurisdiction and save taxpayer dollars since everything was federal, and that was one of the cases that they just put with, they incorporated it in with the possession case.
Statement that you had on your document, it says I was arrested after being on the run for several years. What does that mean?
I absconded. When I found out that the feds were looking to arrest me, it wasn't long after I had my first child. And back then, my mindset was much different than it is today. And in my mind, I decided to take my daughter. I had some money, and I left. And I lived on the run for approximately 6 years.
I understood correctly what you said. The mail fraud charges were really brought about by the actions of another person, but the mailbox was in your name.
Yes.
So you were the person that was formally charged.
In my, as they say, in my file, there's not, it was all one thing and then that, and that's the reason that it was there.
You aware of the fraudulent activity that was taking place through that mail service, even though you might not have been directly involved in it?
Yes, I was aware.
Watson, I may have overlooked it. How many years have you been licensed in the state of Illinois?
I received my funeral director's license in May of 2017. I started going into the prep room in January of 2015. I started working at the funeral home in January of 2000. Excuse me, I want to clear that up a little. I started my mortuary program in September of 14, and we started going into the lab portion and allowed to go to Cook County Morgue in January of 15. And so at that time, I went to the general manager and got permission to start going into the prep room as well. Helped me do better studies. I wasn't familiar with anything that some of the things, the subject matter at school, I was having a lot of difficulties with. So I requested to go in, could I go into the prep room? And it helped me, and I ended up, as soon as I got my license, a place prep room, I became part of the embalming. Particular funeral, incredible volume.
Have no disciplinary.
No.
Appears through your letters of recommendation that you've also been afforded the opportunity to meet with families in the making of funeral arrangements as well.
There's nothing in the funeral home that I have not done. Nothing, from arrangements to, I've done out-of-town removals. For a while, I did all the out-of-town removals. Arrangements, dressing, casketing, cosmetizing, whatever needs to be. Family first. Job that needs to be done to make sure that what the family has to go through is gone through as smoothly as possible. I'm an outstanding.
Involved in the pre-arrangement process as well.
I have not been involved in the pre-arrangement process, but I have gone to take the insurance class so that I can sit for my insurance license. I'm going to also sit for the insurance license here, but I am supposed to take my exam, I think April the 4th, for my insurance license, so that I can do pre-need insurance. As I understand it, you don't have to have an insurance license to do pre-need, but I would like to have an insurance license to do the insurance aspect of it.
Couples have two.
Yes, they have two. Well, they have a third one, but they haven't opened it yet. But
What type of volume do they do?
2 weeks ago, we had 31 funerals on a Saturday. That's not counting the rest. There are 3 staff embalmers. When Nigel went on vacation, Leonard and I embalmed 52 bodies in 4 days. I'm sorry, 52 bodies in 4 days. So they average 40 to 50 funerals a week. So it has allowed me to do a lot.
Ms. Bendel, if I understand you correctly, if this application is approved, there's no need to go through all of the Fresh Start Act.
That's correct.
They're all
If it's
that, okay.
approved, we just
Okay.
move forward.
Your recommendation or what I think I understood you to say about the crime of possession and so forth. Your recommendation was that that part under the Fresh Start Act could not be held against Ms. Watson. Is that correct?
Possession with intent.
Yes.
Yes, because it's a drug crime.
Okay.
Usually, it's not held.
Okay. Is that opinion, or is that something in statute that we?
It's
we
in the
just-
statute.
Okay. Okay. All right. And so the only thing that would apply is just that mail fraud.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And then we'd weigh the factors.
Okay.
Which
And-
I believe
right.
you all have the analysis of.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I make a motion that Ms. Watson be approved for licensure.
Second.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rom and a second by Mr. Davis to approve Ms. Watson's application. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Congratulations.
Thank you.
We wish you the best.
Where did I go to get my license number?
Miss Bohannon will help you there.
It's not hardly that simple. Almost, but not hardly.
Thank you for coming all this way today and being here and appearing. Thank you, because I know it was a trip for you.
Yes, ma'am.
The next one is John R. Kreff III.
Mr. President, Mr. Kreff, he's seeking licensure as an embalmer. He currently holds a funeral director's license number 203. Let me start over. He currently holds a funeral director's license, which is number 20300, that was administratively issued on January 6, 2020. Based on the application, the board may, among other statutes and rules, specifically examine Tennessee Code Annotated 62-5-311B3 in making a determination of whether or not the applicant meets the requirements for licensure. He does not have an associate degree, but the statute says that the latter part of that says may meet such qualifications provided that non-resident applicant has been licensed by another state or provincial authority in good standing for 5 years and has been employed as a funeral director or embalmer or both for such time. If I recall, his license was issued by the Illinois Board in 1992. He submitted a letter where he'd been employed for 10 years, 10 continuous years at an establishment in Illinois. That was through March of 2019, and then he's practiced as a trade embalmer and funeral director since that time. He had, I forgot whether I mentioned this in the beginning or not, he has another appointment today. He is actually living here in Tennessee now. He is living in the Nashville area, Nashville, Franklin, Brentwood area, and he communicated to Ms. Bohannon that he has a previous commitment, and he would ask the board to consider this for approval in his absence. Answer some questions. I don't know that I can answer all the questions you might have.
In this case, this is just one that you wouldn't normally approve, but it's coming to us pretty much as a formality. Would that be correct?
Under the board authority, I can administratively review everyone that meets the statutory requirements where it's clearly meted. The board has, and Ms. Bendel can explain this further, but the board has discretion in this area, and it's not a. If he'd had the associate's degree instead of the diploma, then I would have administratively approved it. But since he didn't has a diploma, and we contacted him, and he sought some additional clarification from the mortuary college, and they responded, and he's been very cooperative in working with us.
And there's been cases like this before that was brought before the board and the board approved.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Motion that we accept the approval license.
Have a motion by Mr. Bridges to approve this application. We have a second. Second by Mr. Rom. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the motion is carried. Let's see, the next individual is Travis Dwayne Howell. And he's already ready here. Okay.
President Howell, he was approved as a apprentice funeral director and apprentice embalmer on December 11, 2017, and that was just before the statute went into play, to where he was approved as apprentice funeral director and apprentice embalmer. Registrations expired December. Did the rules. March 12, 2019, when they were effective. There's a rule that says a person shall not re-register for an apprenticeship if the person previously completed an apprenticeship, which he hasn't completed it, or less than 12 months have passed since substantial completion, over 51% of an apprenticeship, and he has completed over 51% of his apprenticeship. And upon a showing of good cause, the waiting period of 12 months may be waived by the board. So that's the reason that the application for an apprentice funeral director and apprentice embalmer. And if he were to be approved this time, it'd be for a 3-year period, being consistent with the new laws.
Mr. Howe, do you have any comments you want to make to the board? Or
honestly, Mr. President, I really don't know what to say, but my goal was to do the apprenticeship and schooling at the same time. I am currently a full-time student at John A. Gupton and I do work more than 40 hours a week in the funeral home. But unfortunately, due to financial restrictions, I started my schooling a little late, so I'm still in school, and my apprenticeship kind of lapsed on me. But having the apprenticeship really, helps with my schooling and really allows me to better understand what's actually going on in the industry as I learn it, in schooling.
Taking your classes on campus, or are you in their online program at Gupton College?
I'm in Associate of Applied Science. I do serve my labs, and I will be required online the last 2 or 3 weeks for my restorative arts labs and some of the other labs, but everything else is online.
Started this week.
Summer of last year was my very first semester.
After reviewing the documents that we have and hearing from Mr. Gribble, I certainly don't have any problem in granting this application, approving this application.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Have a motion by Mr. Bridges and a second by Mr. Davis to approve Mr. Howell's application. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Congratulations. Thank you. I do not believe we have any establishments today and any new business to come before the board. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. All right. Motion by Mr. Davis to adjourn. Second by Mr. Rom. Thank you.